New York and the shadow of affluence. When I set foot in New York City, I'm always struck by the pulse that never dies. The cabs streaming down Fifth, the hum of foreign languages bouncing off the marble walls of Grand Central, and the neon veins running along Times Square. New York isn't just America's largest metropolis, it's the dream engine, drawing in those who crave reinvention and success. As the epicenter of finance, politics, art, and pop culture, it's a magnet for ambition, excess, and sometimes something much darker hidden beneath a polished veneer. But beyond the tourist postcards and the bright lights, there exists an undercurrent most will never see. This city's luxury means gated neighborhoods on the Upper East Side, penthouses worth more than small countries, gleaming skyscrapers, the spires that cast both literal and figurative shadows over the struggling communities below. Manhattan's wealth doesn't just sparkle, it sometimes blinds, suppressing the stories of those trying and failing to reach the top, spotlighting only the select few who make it. On the west side of the city lies Northwoods, a name you won't find on most official maps. A residential patch where old money meets new, where fortunes are made from tech, finance, and family dynasties. Tree-lined streets conceal imposing mansions with security systems more robust than some banks. Here the scent of freshly cut grass mixes with the muted throb of Euro sports cars. It is in these enclaves, hidden from the chaos of Midtown and the restless art of Brooklyn, that a new generation of American aristocracy flourishes. It's a landscape where status is currency. Parties look innocent from the outside, all laughter, jazz quartets, sparkling wine, but the competition for influence and approval is deadly serious. One slip from grace means exile from the circle, and to lose one's place is almost as damning as financial ruin. To belong is to play the part. Flawless exterior, ambitious, attractive, discreet about one's vices. Nothing too scandalous ever makes it outside the Northwoods gates, or so it seems. Yet those spires, those brownstones, and elegant Victorian homes often hide secrets most would never dare whisper. The city that gawks at celebrities on their morning coffee run is just as eager to look away from the scandals that don't fit the aspirational narrative. New York, for all its opportunity, fosters both the brightest lights and the deepest shadows, worlds of possibility, and worlds carefully shut tight behind designer doors. The legacy of affluence here is a double-edged sword. It inspires, dazzles, and in rare cases corrupts absolutely. The protagonist, Maxwell Reed, or simply Max to those who know him, is not your average multimillionaire New Yorker. At the age of 41, Max stands as a paradox carved straight out of modern American aristocracy. Suave, enigmatic, and the kind of man you'd easily mistake for being a decade younger. Sporting tailored suits and a meticulous grooming routine, he commands every room without needing to shout. Years of discipline and vanity converge in his ageless appearance. His square jaw shaven clean, his dark hair always in place as if sculpted by the city's upper echelon of stylists. Max was born into privilege, the son of Walter Reed, a Wall Street titan whose sudden death in a boating accident left Max as the unwitting heir to both a fortune and a legacy, stained with whispered secrets. His mother, Evelyn, always the picture of understated elegance, moved to California with Max's younger sister soon after, the kind of family fracture that quietly speaks volumes in the world of inherited wealth. The Northwoods estate, a sprawling Beaux-Arts mansion hidden behind thick hedges and iron gates, became Max's dominion. Here, the rarest cars line the private drive and priceless art stares coolly from marble walls, yet its vastness feels empty after midnight. Max is infamous in Northwoods for his long string of relationships, often with much younger, ambitious women. Yet those close to him whisper that he's never let anyone close enough to truly know him. Rumors swirl about why a man of his means and charm hasn't settled down. Some say it's the shadow of his father's mysterious life. Others claim Max is simply incapable of trust, forged by a lifetime in rooms where affection could be bought or bartered. To those on the outside, Max is the embodiment of the American dream realized. Fabulously wealthy, perennially single, owner of a palatial home and enough social capital to pluck opportunities from thin air. He's the guest of honor at charity galas, the star of whispered gossip at private club bars, and the face of glossy magazine profiles no one truly reads. But this surface hides a ruthless survivor whose entire adulthood has been about holding the polished mask perfectly in place, even as cracks threaten to show during the city's longest nights. Beneath his charm and eccentricities, there's a loneliness that clings to Max like the lingering echo in his cavernous halls. His family is scattered, his closest friends are also his business rivals, and the staff who cater to his every whim know better than to expect gratitude. When he hosts lavish dinner parties, the conversation sparkles, the laughter rolls. But when the last guest departs, Max tours the darkened corridors alone, a single bourbon in hand, pondering the cost of belonging to New York's untouchable class. Maxwell's story is one of privilege and paradox, a man who has everything, yet is haunted by the mysteries inherited alongside his wealth. In Northwoods, his legend grows with every whispered secret, every tabloid photo, and every flash of charm that may just conceal the kind of darkness that only the rich can afford to keep hidden. The dark undercurrent. Beneath the shimmering surface, beneath all the dazzling luxury and aspirational gloss of Northwoods mansions, a different reality coils quietly out of sight. It's not just the city's skyline that casts a shadow. The cultural obsession with success, status, and immutable social circles also breeds currents most New Yorkers never see. While penthouse windows sparkle above Central Park and art dealers parade through marble galleries, in corners rarely spoken about outside hushed circles, stories take form that few would ever believe. Northwoods, for all its manicured hedges and perfectly maintained facades, is rife with silent competition and hush-hush secrets. The residents perfected the art of surface. Cocktail parties radiate laughter, charity galas boast celebrities, and neighborhood newsletters share only the victories. But scratch that veneer and what's left is a labyrinth of unspoken rules and survival instincts, where people are valued for their usefulness, alliances are transactional, and trust is a luxury more rare than any gem housed on display. Maxwell Reed, with his glossy reputation and picture-perfect lifestyle, is both a mirror and a mask for these deeper currents. Those close enough to observe the late-night arrivals at his mansion or the circles he frequents know. Some nights, expensive cars come and go without any lights on. Some mornings the gardener pretends not to notice a spot of dark red on the back patio's stonework. Whispers curl around the social clubs. About personal assistants who there one week, gone the next. About security teams replaced for asking too many questions. About business rivals who seem to quietly disappear from the cocktail roundabout. It isn't just individuals at risk. For every glittering charity drive or museum wing opened in a donor's name, there's a parallel world, a world of hush money, threats delivered by gloved hands, and problems handled in-house. When crime or scandal knocks on Northwood's iron gates, it's often met not with panic but with the smooth, almost rehearsed calm of people who understand the stakes. Stories get rewritten, evidence disappears, and the outside world is quickly convinced that nothing out of the ordinary ever happens here. Yet the cost of keeping up appearances is enormous. Staff live in constant apprehension. Young women fresh to the social scene are told which parties to avoid and which rooms of which mansions are permanently off limits after midnight. The deeper the wealth, the more tangled the threats. Investments with questionable origins, ties to shadowy figures overseas, addiction quietly nursed behind bathroom doors. Despair flickers behind every dazzling smile just for a second before being buried beneath another expensive distraction. It's in this climate of paranoia, privilege, and predation that the cracks begin to show. Under the glow of Northwood streetlights, there's a tension you can almost taste. Every neighbor watching every other, every friend a potential liability, every secret potentially explosive. It's not the kind of fear that makes headlines, yet. But as history proves, and as those who serve in Northwoods know too well, darkness has a way of finding its own way to the surface no matter how much marble or money is piled on top to keep it down. A fateful day in May. Sometimes tragedy doesn't announce itself with sirens or warning bells, it simply arrives, changing everything in the silence between moments. The morning of May 9, 2020, broke quietly over the 5 boroughs of New York City, still and bright and almost peaceful, until chaos began brewing at the NYPD's downtown precinct headquarters. Inside the cement-gray walls, detectives moved with that particular tension that hangs in the air before something big happens. Phones rang incessantly, coffee cooled untouched, and the normally boisterous bullpen had the hush of a church before a funeral. Among the clatter, the focus zeroed in on Interview Room 2, where a man known as Jack Burns, a veteran security contractor in his early 40s with a sun-leathered face and nervous blue eyes, sat hunched in a plastic chair, hands trembling, sweat beading on his brow. Just a few hours before, Jack had been picked up on charges related to narcotics possession, a career-ending crime in itself, but he was a desperate man with nothing left to lose. When the detectives pressed him, dangling the possibility of leniency, Jack made a decision that would ripple outward for months to come. He began to talk, not about drugs, but about something far grimmer, a murder buried deep in the city's underbelly, hidden behind the locked gates of one of its most affluent gated communities. Jack's voice was hoarse, his story fragmented at first. He recounted his employment at the Northwoods estate of Maxwell Reed, the enigmatic financier whose wealth and influence made him untouchable in most circles. Jack's confession came in waves, hesitant, remorseful, each word a stone dropping into the pond of police attention. He told them about a night of violence, of bone-chilling screams muffled by heavy doors, and of the chilling moment when a life ended behind the imposing facade of marble and glass. He hadn't planned to talk, but fear for himself, for his future, maybe even for his soul, stripped away the thin armor of loyalty he used to protect himself all these years. The detectives, seasoned but visibly shaken, realized they were not just dealing with another routine city homicide. Jack's account hinted at something monstrous, hidden in plain sight, the kind of secret that gnawed at the city's golden reputation. As the story spilled out, details of abusive power, clandestine cover-ups, perhaps more victims lost to the shadows, the officers began assembling a task force. Paperwork was expedited, calls were made to the district attorney's office, forensic vans idled ready in the precinct's rear lot. Every cop and agent sensed they were inches from prying open a Pandora's box of secrets that Northwoods society had fought decades to keep sealed. That fateful May Day, New York woke up on the edge of its next scandal, but for those inside the precinct, Jack Burns at the center, the detectives gripping the reins of truth, Max Reed asleep in his fortress just uptown. Life had already begun to unravel. The dominoes were falling, and the city, for all its glitz, was powerless to stop what would come next. From testimony to the horrifying crime scene, Jack Burns' confession was a tornado in the precinct, sudden, rattling, and leaving chaos in its wake. Until that moment, the investigation into Maxwell Reed had been a spider's web of rumors, well-guarded secrets, and whispers among Northwood staff who always seemed too terrified to say more. Now, with the dam broken, the NYPD had what they needed, a lead so chilling and precise that no one in the room that day dared to doubt its authenticity. Jack laid out the blueprint of a nightmare he had lived. The mansion of Maxwell, nestled behind privet hedges and high-security gates, was no ordinary home. Within its 20,000 square feet sprawled not just extravagance but meticulously concealed truths. A man-made lake glittered behind the house, framed by lawns so immaculate they seemed unreal under the morning sun. But it was the basement, or the vault, as staff called it in hushed voices that clung to Jack's memory with the sharpness of a blade. He described the night Riley Evans moved in with Maxwell, her laughter echoing off marble floors, their chemistry a constant source of gossip among housekeepers. But that same night, Jack noticed changes in Maxwell, a slight rigidity to his posture, an edge to his voice when Riley hesitated. As days blurred past each other, Riley's presence became quieter. Jack caught glimpses of her standing at windows when she thought no one was looking, or tiptoeing down the grand staircase past midnight, eyes wary as a startled deer. It was late summer when everything shifted. In precise, methodical detail, Jack walked the detectives through the events, the echoes of an argument that careened into violence, muffled shouts drowned by operatic music deliberately cranked up to teeth-rattling levels. He spoke of the chilling moment he realized Maxwell was not just angry, but utterly unhinged. Riley was dragged, unconscious, through the house and locked away in a steel container in the basement. Her screams, thunderous at first, faded into nothing as hours ticked by. Jack admitted to standing outside the bolted door, paralyzed by the threat of losing his job, or his life, if he intervened. The confession grew more harrowing. Jack told how the next morning a heavy, haunted silence pressed down on the house. Maxwell, wild-eyed, ordered him to help dispose of Riley's body. They wrapped her delicately in plastic sheeting, as if any care in that moment could erase what had been done, and carried her out to the far reaches of the estate. Jack's hands shook as he recounted how they buried the evidence beneath layers of soil and stone, how in that moment he knew there was no turning back. Scrambling teams of officers responded, led by a mixture of dread and determination. The crime scene was cordoned off with yellow tape within hours of the confession. As detectives swept the grounds, following each contour of Jack's testimony, the true horror of the place began to reveal itself. In the side yard the soil was disturbed, the earth soft where it should be packed, the smell of decay trickling through the grass. Specialists in blue gloves worked methodically, spades slipping through the dirt until they struck metal. Slowly, painstakingly, they unearthed a steel container exactly as Jack described. Inside, under police flashlights, was a sight that made even the most seasoned officers flinch. The remains of Riley Evans, carefully wrapped but forever altered by what had transpired. Beside her, investigators cataloged personal effects, fragments of fabric, and a collection of items too sinister to belong in any home. The authorities moved with the procedural precision of those who danced around too many horrors to count, but this one still broke something in them. The media would later depict the scene as an American Gothic nightmare, a phrase that would stick in the nation's mind for months. It was only after the initial forensics that anyone dared to breathe, let alone speak. Jack Burns, eyes hollow and voice raw, became the linchpin for uncovering the house of horrors that was Maxwell Reed's estate. What had begun with a desperate confession would spiral into a revelation more macabre than anyone involved, not the police, not the public, not Riley's shattered family, could have possibly imagined. Distorted love and a terrifying prison. The tale of Maxwell Reed and Riley Evans was never one of simple romance. It wasn't fairy tale dinners or innocent walks under Manhattan's spring cherry blossoms. From the outside, Riley's introduction to Northwood society seemed like a rags-to-riches fantasy. Young, fiercely intelligent, but vulnerable, she was drawn to Max, the older man whose reputation for charm and enigma preceded him everywhere. What began as seduction soon morphed into something else entirely, a tragic spiral that neither glamour nor money could conceal. Maxwell's brand of affection was unlike anything Riley had known before. At first, his intensity thrilled her. He showered her with extravagant gifts, evenings at the Met, drives in classic cars along the Hudson, private dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants where celebrity chefs came out just to greet Max. But those gestures, Riley would later confide in a friend, always carried an undercurrent of control. Her wardrobe subtly shifted to meet his preferences. She found herself losing contact with old friends, as Max discouraged her from seeing people who might distract her from their relationship. To the world, she was living every aspiring New Yorker's dream. Privately, she began to nurse a budding fear she could hardly name. Northwoods was a world with unspoken rules that favored men like Max, powerful, connected, accustomed to always getting what they want, in business, in pleasure, and in love. The estate itself became both playground and prison. Staff, trained to serve in total silence, quickly learned to avert their eyes from closed doors or muffled arguments. Riley's laughter echoed less in the halls. Her figure, always perfectly coiffed, became almost spectral, a beautiful bird trapped in a golden cage. Their fights, when they came, were predictably private and chillingly quiet. Max's anger wasn't raw or explosive, it was cold. When Riley questioned him about his clandestine business calls late at night, or the steady turnover of staff who seemed to disappear without warning, he would reply with icy calm, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than a shout. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered," he said once, his hand brushing her cheek with both tenderness and warning. That night, Riley slept with her phone hidden under her pillow, but found herself unable to call anyone. As the months wore on, Riley found herself isolated from the world she'd once belonged to. Her own family, living thousands of miles away, received only carefully filtered updates, photos of sunsets by the estate's lake, a smiling Max at her side, the pair always posed and perfect. Alone in her suite, Riley began keeping a journal, scribbled anxiously beneath the glow of an opulent chandelier. In it, she documented every strange noise, every inexplicable absence, every bruise she couldn't quite account for, all the while torn between fear and the hope she might still change things for the better. The house itself seemed to conspire against her. Doors that led to private wine cellars or the infamous basement vault were always locked, with keys jealously guarded by Max or trusted staff. On several occasions, Riley caught glimpses of security guards moving with an urgency not befitting the supposed tranquility of the estate. Once, late at night, she awoke to the echo of shouts coming from downstairs, followed by a thick, unnatural silence that made her skin crawl. The next morning, the only trace of the disturbance was the faint scent of bleach lingering along the marble floors. The pressure inside the Northwoods mansion grew unbearable. Max's affection now alternated with icy indifference and stinging rebukes. The more Riley tried to assert herself, to claim her own life within the gilded walls, the harsher his punishments became. Initially, it was coldness and withdrawal from the lavish attention she'd grown accustomed to, Later, there were threats, veiled references to the power he wielded and all the things and people he could make disappear. "You waltzed into a world you can't possibly understand," Max once told her during a fight. "Here, there's only my way, or no way at all." Riley's physical world shrank to a handful of rooms: her bedroom, the guest suite she was told to use for privacy, the sunken living room where Max liked to entertain guests but kept her firmly out of conversations about serious matters. The emotional cage was more insidious. Over time, Riley lost the instinct to challenge Max. Her confidence was chipped away by 1,000 quiet humiliations and the ever-present knowledge that the staff, watchful yet powerless, were just as trapped as she was. Their sideways glances, nervous behavior, and the odd whispers she caught in passing told her they knew what was happening. But the code of silence in Northwoods ran as deep as its marble foundations. The day of the final confrontation began like any other. Riley cooked breakfast herself, a ritual she'd adopted in a desperate effort to cling to normalcy. She served Max's coffee, watched him read the news in silence, and rehearsed once more the words she'd tried to say so many times before. "I want to leave for a while, Max, just a break, some space." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Max didn't respond at first. He simply looked at her, his gray eyes cool and unblinking. When he finally spoke, the words were measured, calm, terrifyingly so. "You leave, and I don't guarantee you'll ever find your way back." Riley felt her heart hammering. She'd heard threats before, but this one was absolute. Her panic was interrupted by Max suddenly rising, and in a blur, his anger finally showed its true violence. The fight that followed was a rush of terror. Riley's pleas for reason, Max's grip unyielding, the blur of fists and the unmistakable snap of dominance shifting from psychological to physical. She lost consciousness. When she awoke, it was in darkness. Her wrists and ankles ached, cold metal pressed against her skin. At first she thought she'd been taken to a safe room, then reality filtered in through panic. She was locked in the steel container, the vault she'd often been warned away from. The air was thin, the darkness total, and somewhere above, faint traces of music, operatic, grotesquely cheerful, filtered through heavy locks. Riley screamed until her voice was barely a rasp. Downstairs, Jack Burns, the head of security, heard the commotion. He hovered outside the door, wrestling with loyalty and fear. He'd seen enough of Max's retribution to know the cost of defiance. So he waited, as so many others in Northwoods had waited in paralyzed horror for years, for the ordeal to be over. Hours turned into dawn. When the door was finally opened, hope gave way to tragedy. Riley was gone. What had once masqueraded as love was revealed to be obsession, a warped, poisonous thing born of power and isolation. Maxwell's cruelty was never just about control, it was about erasing another's will completely. In the aftermath, the corridors of Northwoods became haunted by what took place that summer night. The estate, which once promised new beginnings, became the site of an unspeakable end, a reminder that money can purchase silence, but never redemption. The horrifying siege and search operation. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the Manhattan skyline when a convoy of unmarked police vehicles rolled through the manicured avenues of Northwoods, headlights cutting under the gentle June dusk. The tension was palpable. Even before the squad cars reached their destination, the air seemed to carry an electric charge, the entire neighborhood holding its collective breath, as the day's serenity buckled under what was about to unfold. For years rumors had circulated, whispers behind champagne flutes and sidelong glances, but now the truth was coming home to roost with the clamor of sirens and the unmistakable chill of consequences. The assault team approached Maxwell Reed's estate with caution instilled by both protocol and fear. The mansion itself, massive and eerily silent, stood like a fortress at the end of a winding, gravel-lined drive. Tall hedges shielded it from prying eyes, but tonight every secret was about to be laid bare. Commanding officers coordinated final plans through clipped radio calls. The perimeter would be secured, all possible exits covered, every member armed with the knowledge that wealth and influence could make even the most basic of police work suddenly unpredictable. Somewhere upstairs, Max was beginning to feel the first uncomfortable tug of reality's unraveling. By most accounts, he had spent the afternoon in a drunken stupor, the sharp scent of single malt lingering in the corridors as he stumbled from room to ornate room. It wasn't until he caught sight of a flicker outside, movement in the trees, a shape passing by the courtyard fountain, that he suspected the nightmares he'd kept at bay might finally have come to claim him. He was angry, then terrified, then determined. He'd spent a lifetime buying silence, lucky enough to believe in his own immunity. But as panic began to rise, there was no one left in the bedrooms, no staff in the halls, no allies to summon, only the approach of something unstoppable. The raid began not with a bang, but a series of meticulously rehearsed motions. Officers fanned out at the front and rear entrances, flashlights slicing through the darkness. The grand front door, once a threshold for so many glamorous arrivals, received a battering ram's swift justice. The noise echoed up through the marble, glass and gold leaf of the entryway, a shockwave that ricocheted through every chandelier and luxury fitting. Max, rattled but defiant, responded with the stubborn resistance of someone who'd never imagined this day would come. He fired wildly, his hands trembling, shattering a priceless vase and burying bullets in ancient plaster as the police moved swiftly, returning fire only as necessary. For a moment, the orchestrated chaos of gunshots and shouts swallowed the mansion's usual silence. Then, as abruptly as it began, it was over. Max pinned to the glittering parquet, his wrists cinched tight by the same law he had avoided for decades. As the living embodiment of Northwoods' darkest secrets was finally subdued, the tone inside the home changed. Crime scene investigators began their methodical sweep, dispassionate and efficient, the sterile gleam of evidence markers soon disrupting the aesthetic perfection. Flashbulbs popped, cameras cataloging every detail, as detectives and technicians spread out to uncover just how deep this particular darkness ran. In the soft earth of the garden, search dogs barked, then whined, circling a spot where the lawn was a shade too vibrant, the soil just slightly unsettled compared to its surroundings. It took a matter of minutes for the digging to begin, shovels biting through the soil as neighbors peered from upper-story windows, their faces pale specters behind designer curtains. Each movement was methodical, a slow revelation, layers of mulch, then rich black earth, until the unmistakable clang of metal on metal signaled the discovery the world would soon shudder over. The heavy steel container was exhumed with the aid of a winch, its cold shape betraying nothing until authorities forced the rusted lid open. The sight inside was at once clinical and profoundly disturbing, evidence of a tragedy that seemed almost unreal amidst the lush opulence of Northwoods. Riley Evans, hidden away and wrapped in a grotesquely careful manner, was found just as Jack Burns had described in his confession. Crime scene photographers moved silently, their lenses capturing every angle, while detectives cataloged not just the human remains but the myriad of items recovered alongside, fragments of jewelry, shreds of luxury linens, and ominous instruments that no household should ever contain. There was a peculiar nausea that settled over the investigative team. Some stood back, jaws clenched, others pressed onwards, determined that every detail would be logged, no matter how nightmarish. Inside the house, the search was no less chilling. The officers swept from room to room, uncovering stockpiles of illicit drugs, hidden compartments filled with suspicious paperwork, and weaponry that belonged in an arms cache, not a place of supposed domesticity. The heavy ornate doors leading to the basement, the so-called vault, were unlocked with keys retrieved from Max's own pocket. Down below, under strips of harsh fluorescent lighting fit for no mansion, lay further evidence of the agony endured within these walls. Restraints affixed to ancient pipes, blood-stained rags hidden in darkness, and security logs that painted a picture of systematic, premeditated cruelty. Outside, night fully claimed the estate, but the lawn was a haze of police strobes and the drone of news helicopters circling overhead. The media frenzy was instantaneous. Reporters jostled for position beyond the cordon, broadcasting live just yards away from the tableau of horror. Neighbors, those who had sipped champagne with Max at charity galas, the same ones who'd admired his impeccable tailoring and debated his stock picks, now gathered in tight little clusters, their shock feeding the hungry cameras. The investigators, meanwhile, moved unhindered, shielded by their duty if not their nerves, intent on piecing together every horror the house offered up. Long into the night the estate was a place transformed by revelation and grief. Canine units expanded their sweep, searching lakes and outbuildings for any hint of additional victims or evidence. For hours it seemed nothing escaped scrutiny, not the security feeds, not the muddy tire tracks near the service driveway, not even the kitchen pantry, where police uncovered coded ledgers and encrypted drives. Each layer they peeled back revealed more rot. Every hidden room, every stash of cash and contraband, was a piece of the puzzle no one had dared piece together until now. Max himself was kept in a separate patrol car, glassy-eyed and handcuffed, as detectives cycled in and out for preliminary questioning. There was little trace of his old arrogance. He seemed smaller somehow, shrunken by the sheer magnitude of his own exposure. From a safe distance, neighbors whispered, wondering how such violence could have gone unnoticed, how many warning signs they had chosen to ignore for the sake of comfort and status. For the Northwoods Enclave, it was a collective reckoning, a moment when no amount of wealth could buy back the security they had so long taken for granted. As dawn broke, the reality settled harder than any midnight storm. Evidence teams loaded the last items into vans while forensic experts drafted initial reports, all under the first light of a day that would change the neighborhood forever. The state coroner's vehicle departed in silence, leaving behind scorched grass and a household forever marked as a site of infamy. News anchors speculated about what would come next: court proceedings, political inquiries, perhaps even a renewed examination into other local disappearances. But as the sun finally rose, glinting off shattered windows and the battered front door, one thing was certain: Northwoods would never again be a symbol only of privilege, but of the darkness that unchecked power and silence could conceal. In the hearts and minds of those who bore witness, police, neighbors, the relentless press, the image of the raid and the horrors uncovered would linger long after the headlines moved on. The dark past of Maxwell Reed. From the moment the authorities unearthed evidence linking Maxwell Reed to the unimaginable horrors hidden beneath the surface of his estate, the question that troubled everyone, detectives, neighbors, and a fearful public alike, was simple. How could one man have kept so many secrets for so long? The answers, as they trickled out during the investigation, painted a portrait of a man shaped as much by darkness as privilege, whose very origins foreshadowed the tragedies to come. Maxwell's childhood was draped in wealth, but it was never warm. The Reed family's mansion was not a home, but a labyrinth of polished corridors, where every surface gleamed and every sound was muffled by expensive carpets. His father, Walter Reed, was a figure whose presence thrilled and terrified in equal measure, a titan of finance, never seen without his custom-tailored suits, or the air of danger that seemed to linger after he left a room. Friends of the family would later recall strange absences, unexpected trips, and rows of locked cabinets no one but Walter dared open. Maxwell, even as a boy, learned early that silence was often a matter of survival. The first recorded disappearance linked to the estate occurred when Maxwell was just 12 years old. A housekeeper's daughter, only a few years older, vanished after being invited to swim in the private lake. The case went nowhere. Rumors circled, but no arrest was made. According to confidential interviews uncovered years later, young Max had a hand in misleading investigators, parroting what he had overheard his parents say, just enough to cast doubt and wrap the event in fog. As Maxwell grew older, his inner circle remained remarkably small. At exclusive boarding schools and Ivy League halls, he developed a keen sense of whom to trust and whom to manipulate. Former classmates recalled that Max could shift from charm to icy cruelty in a heartbeat. He kept dark souvenirs, photos, an old-school tie stained with something like blood, a silver ring taken from a missing student. Each item seemed to mark a memory, a warning, or a suppressed confession. If anyone pressed too closely, the topic would vanish from conversation as if erased from reality. After Walter Reed's suspicious death, wealth poured into Max's control. Now, free from his father's shadow and with his mother retreating to California, Max turned Northwoods into a fortress, a playground where power could be exercised without consequence. A steady parade of young women, domestic staff, and business associates entered his life. Some, like Riley Evans, would vanish wholly. Others, traumatized, fled and were paid to remain silent, their stories drifting into urban legend. Over decades, local folklore grew. Kids whispered about lights flickering at odd hours and the drowned voices said to haunt the estate's lake. There were unexplained car accidents on the winding drive, arguments that seemed to end abruptly with settlement checks signed in Max's hand, and rumors of parties where guests never felt safe if they stayed past midnight. A pattern emerged, but money was the constant solvent, dissolving evidence, memory, and hope for justice. Detectives who combed Reed's estate after his arrest found chilling corroboration for what many had long suspected. In deep storage rooms, beneath lift-away floor panels or hidden behind false walls, they discovered personal effects belonging to women and girls missing over 3 decades. A locket engraved with initials, shoes no adult would own, journals filled with desperate, unfinished pleas for help. Bones, some fragile and child-sized, were recovered from the lake's silt, matched through painstaking DNA analysis to names lost on lists of the missing dating back to the 1990s. More than one investigator remarked that it felt as though each discovery unlocked a new level of depravity, an expanding ledger of loss spanning generations. These victims were not just statistics. They were nannies, babysitters, friends lured in by charm or need, or even neighborhood children who'd simply wandered too close to the estate. Each story was unique, but the pattern, lured, isolated, silenced, remained unnervingly familiar across the decades. Part of the horror came from how meticulously Max covered his tracks. He employed investigators to trace those who inquired too much, hackers to wipe digital records, and lawyers whose sole mandate was containment. If a family pressed for answers, they would find private eyes shadowing them, or receive anonymous offers of cash in exchange for withdrawal. For years, his status in New York society was not simply a shield, it was a weapon, expertly wielded to silence anyone who might threaten the world he had built for himself. Journalists, at great personal risk, attempted on several occasions to expose the recurring disappearances and unexplainable payouts connected to Northwoods. Such stories would be suppressed, reporters threatened with lawsuits or worse. Editors' resolve often crumbled under legal pressure or the possibility of being blackballed from future access to New York's social elite. For every headline that saw the light, there were a dozen leads buried with a phone call, or more chillingly, with the promise of an exclusive that would never materialize. Max controlled not only his narrative but the possible narratives of those around him. Max's psychological profile, later drawn up by forensic psychiatrists, was a tapestry stitched from privilege, trauma, and pathology. They noted how his early lessons in manipulation and secrecy had blossomed into a full-blown disorder. He derived satisfaction not just from control, but from erasure, the deliberate act of removing inconvenient people, experiences, or even memories from the record. Those close to him described a man with moments of intoxicating charisma, but whose eyes went cold and distant during the rare times someone breached his defenses. Max was a consummate chameleon, able to charm a gala audience one evening and terrify a housekeeper behind closed doors the next. Even within the Northwood circle, where secrets are currency and the cost of curiosity is high, whispers about Max gradually spread through generations. Some elders recalled troubling incidents or sudden firings, the house manager who left mid-shift and was never seen again, the piano teacher who packed quietly after only a handful of lessons. When the truth finally broke, those who had stayed silent out of fear or pride were forced to confront what their silence had enabled. For the survivors, those rare few who escaped Northwoods and dared later to speak, healing was a slow, halting process. The trauma of captivity, compounded by guilt over others who were lost, lingered for years. Some wrote anonymous blogs, others joined groups advocating for the missing, their voices tentative but determined. They provided detectives with crucial insight into Max's patterns and psychology, sometimes even identifying objects the police collected as once belonging to friends who had vanished. Each memory, each fragment of shared experience became a thread that investigators would weave into the broader tapestry of Max's crimes. By the time the full scope of his dark past finally emerged in the national spotlight, Maxwell Reed remained uncannily aloof, often seeming more perturbed by the disruption of his routine than the threat of justice. The Northwoods mansion grew cold and still as the evidence was removed and the crowds dissipated, the land itself seeming to settle under the weight of one man's legacy, a legacy not of greatness, but of darkness nurtured in the shadow of privilege and unchecked power. Buried secrets and drug traces. In the wake of Maxwell Reed's arrest and the chilling discoveries on his estate, the investigation began peeling back layers that the wealthy Northwoods community could have never imagined. If the bodies in the garden and the confessions from staff rocked the city, it was only the beginning of a descent into a darker web, one intricately woven with drugs, power, and secrets long buried under concrete and privilege. Detectives moving through Max's mansion worked with a meticulousness born of both training and dread. Hidden behind luxurious paneling, beneath floorboards and inside false drawers, they began to uncover items that told a story even more perverse than the violence already brought to light. Compartment after compartment yielded stocks of powerful narcotics, powdered cocaine, pressed pills, and small glass vials with contents too dangerous to analyze without protective gear. Forensics teams cataloged every finding, serial numbers scraped off, labels written in codes pointing to international sources, and fingerprints wiped professionally clean. It quickly became clear to seasoned investigators that Maxwell Reed's wealth and status were not solely rooted in family fortunes or stock portfolios. Instead, the estate doubled as a nerve center of a sophisticated trafficking operation, one that funneled drugs, laundered money, and served as a crossroads for various criminal interests in New York and beyond. As detectives widened the scope of their examination, they unearthed ledgers filled with strange symbols and cryptic nicknames, digital drives encrypted with military-grade protection, and burner phones stashed in nearly every major room, many still buzzing with missed calls from untraceable numbers. In the basement, an entire room appeared dedicated to packaging and distribution. Stainless steel counters lined with residue, scales still sticky with powder, and designer luggage packed with vacuum-sealed bricks pointed to a system both highly lucrative and chillingly impersonal. The staff, once suspected of complicity, now appeared as much trapped as Riley and the other victims, many recruited from desperate circumstances, paid hush money, and threatened into silence if they dared step out of line. Surveillance logs confirmed that the comings and goings of delivery drivers, late-night visitors, and supposed contractors often coincided with major citywide drug surges, linking the mansion to a far broader network. The puzzle deepened with every piece of evidence uncovered. Police followed faint but persistent trails, cryptic bank transfers, shell companies operating out of post office boxes, and regular shipments of high-end goods that, on closer scrutiny, were mere fronts for contraband. The operation stretched beyond Northwoods, connecting to shadowy figures in Europe, South America, and Asia, implicating Maxwell as a crucial node in global syndicates. Perhaps most disturbing was his uncanny ability to remain above suspicion for so long. As investigators pored over court records and investigative archives, they found dozens of cold cases, unexplained overdoses, vanished runaways, routine traffic stops swept under the rug after a single phone call from someone on Max's payroll. There were patterns. Witnesses recanted, officers transferred unexpectedly, files went missing or appeared inexplicably incomplete. Clearly, Maxwell's connections and bribes had formed an invisible shield for decades. The psychological toll on the detectives was immense. Many had worked homicide or narcotics for years, yet none had seen such a seamless blend of social legitimacy and criminal enterprise. The mansion, once a symbol of taste and refinement, was now a warehouse of evidence, its glamorous facade stripped away to expose compartmentalized evil. Even the seemingly minor details, the faint chemical odor clinging to the HVAC vents, the reinforced locks on basement doors, became sinister clues in a narrative where nothing was as it first appeared. Among the most haunting discoveries were handwritten journals belonging to household employees, hidden in walls or stashed behind old furniture. In careful, fearful prose they chronicled not just illicit dealings, but the suffocating fear pervading Northwoods. Names were listed, some of women who vanished, others of men who asked too many questions. Notes described mysterious black SUVs parked for hours outside, men in expensive suits dropping off briefcases and leaving with cold efficiency. When pressed, a few brave former employees admitted to having acted as unwilling couriers, forced to deliver packages across the city under threat of harm to their families. The narrative of Northwoods, as it emerged, was one of concentric circles of complicity and terror. Maxwell's power was magnified by secrecy and by his uncanny sense for human weakness. Victims were coerced into silence, neighbors who sensed something wrong chose willful ignorance, or accepted invitations to exclusive dinners that came with the implicit promise of protection, as long as the unspoken rules were obeyed. The mansion's walls, once seen as a mark of exclusivity, were revealed to be barriers designed as much to keep people in as to keep intruders out. The floodgates had finally opened, and with every new revelation, public outrage grew. Journalists swarmed outside the police perimeter, leaks and rumors multiplied, some wild, others confirmed by painstaking evidence. The press rushed to detail not just the horrors of murder, but the vast network of drugs and money laundering reaching far beyond the city. Advocacy groups demanded accountability from both law enforcement and local government, urging a closer look at missing persons reports and unsolved crimes from surrounding neighborhoods. Families of previous missing women resurfaced in the narrative, their grief sharpened by the realization that the system had failed them time and again. As the forensic teams continued their search, it became clear that the story of Maxwell Reed was not merely one of individual depravity, but of institutional rot. Each fingerprint lifted, each coded ledger cracked open, was a damning indictment of a community that had looked the other way, greased by gifts, donations, and backroom deals. The mansion, once a fortress of secrets, now stood as a monument to how privilege and criminality can intertwine, burying truth beneath gilded floors for far too long. The case that shocked America. As the details of Maxwell Reed's crime seeped into public consciousness, the entire nation found itself gripped by a collective sense of horror, disbelief, and morbid fascination. In a country already accustomed to stories of crime and corruption, the Northwoods case stood out not just for its brutality, but for the breathtaking audacity and scale of the secrets that had, for so long, shielded one of New York's most celebrated elite. News stations interrupted programming to deliver breathless updates, while newspapers ran black-bordered headlines usually reserved for political assassinations or national disasters. The Maxwell Reed investigation became a media phenomenon, splintering into talk show debates and seeding conspiracy theories on late-night radio. Within hours of the first confirmed police reports, a horde of journalists descended upon Northwoods, their satellite vans blocking manicured drives and their microphones thrust at anyone remotely connected to the enclave. Helipad footage blasted across major networks, showing officers ferrying evidence in ominous sealed boxes out from Maxwell's once hallowed estate. News segments looped blurry photos of Max from gala nights and earlier society pages, contrasting smiling, dapper appearances with mugshots of a man hollowed out and haunted by exposure. Inside homes across America, viewers absorbed every shocking revelation, each fact more disturbing than the last. That a man so deeply enmeshed in philanthropy, business, and society functions could harbor such monstrous secrets felt paradoxically both unimaginable and, to many, like the logical next step in the country's uneasy romance with wealth and power. If it could happen here, anchors intoned gravely, it could happen anywhere. High-profile commentators and self-styled crime experts debated ceaselessly on primetime television. How could the police have missed so many signals? How deep did the cover-up run in law enforcement, businesses, and local government? The public outrage was palpable, yet beneath it simmered another emotion, unspoken, but clear. Relief. For every neighbor or former employee too afraid to speak out, for every missing person's family who had once thought they were alone in their grief, now there was validation. Their suspicions, hunches, and lost sleep were finally anchored in the court of public opinion. All at once, interest groups seized the moment. Surviving victims and families of the disappeared were thrust into the spotlight, some bravely going before cameras, clutching faded photos and journals, demanding answers. Women's rights organizations and advocates for missing persons mobilized, staging candlelit vigils in front of the police barriers at Northwoods, lining courthouse steps in New York with placards painted with Riley Evans's name and the faces of other lost women. The case reopened old wounds and sparked a reckoning in the national dialogue about power, privilege, police accountability, and the insidiousness of gendered violence. A congressional subcommittee launched an inquiry after reports surfaced of phone calls, donations, and pressure campaigns quietly quashing early leads about Maxwell Reed. Local politicians scrambled to distance themselves from his shadow, many returning campaign contributions or issuing public statements of outrage and sadness. Corruption investigations spun outward, chaining together an array of actors in banking, real estate, and social circles who had once benefited from the illusion of Northwood's unassailable respectability. Online, the court of public opinion was relentless and, at moments, chaotic. Podcasts chronicled every twist in real time. Reddit threads amassed hundreds of thousands of comments as citizen detectives pieced together timelines from digital breadcrumbs, leaked emails, and years-old party photographs. The hashtag #JusticeForRiley trended for weeks, joined by calls for greater transparency in the city's ultra-wealthy enclaves. Parodies and memes lampooned Maxwell's former philanthropy, while long-form journalism dissected the ways in which privilege, money, and image had camouflaged a predator in plain sight. Perhaps most haunting of all were the follow-up interviews with neighbors, school officials, and even household staff. Some articulated gut-wrenching guilt. They had suspected, they had seen bruises or heard rumors, but the immense machinery of wealth and reputation had silenced them or made the price of truth too high. Others were fiercely defensive, insisting there must have been a mistake, that Northwoods was no more or less flawed than any other wealthy corner of America. The media, for its part, ran both stories, juxtaposing denial and regret in a way that captured the profound sense of civic self-examination sweeping the country. Universities and think tanks hosted panels dissecting the Maxwell effect, the power of charisma and money to subvert due process, the dangers of unchecked social isolation, and the warning signs missed by social services. The case slipped into the national language, recounted in op-eds, casual conversations, and late-night television. For months, Northwoods became a symbol of hidden rot, of the dark underbelly of American aspiration, and, for some, of hope that even the most protected secrets could eventually come to light. Trial and total collapse. As the investigation's discoveries reverberated around the country, the epicenter shifted inevitably to the imposing courtrooms of Manhattan. The trial of Maxwell Reed would come to represent more than the fall of a single man. It was now a public reckoning for a system that had shielded him for decades. Journalists and satellite trucks laid siege to the courthouse. Block-long lines queued outside before dawn just for a shot at witnessing history in the making, and those lucky enough to secure a seat in the gallery found themselves in a theater of guilt, denial, and the desperate flailing collapse of power's final mask. The state assembled an unprecedented task force of prosecutors, experts on organized crime, gender-based violence, financial crimes, and narcotics, all working in coordinated silence. The evidence was overwhelming, dozens of meticulously cataloged exhibits, from forensic records to digital ledgers, security footage, coded journals, and the testimonies of traumatized staff. Yet none of that landed as hard as the simple human stories presented one by one, day after day. Former girlfriends, housekeepers, and survivors took the stand, their nerves apparent as they recounted harrowing nights, coded threats, the phantom-like disappearances no one in Northwoods ever discussed out loud. Some wept as they described the gradual erosion of their spirit. Others spoke with a steely composure, determined that the courtroom would be the place where their silence broke forever. "We all knew the rules," whispered one former housemaid, "but nobody dared break them, not ever, not until now." Day after day, prosecution lawyers painted a brutal portrait of an empire built on intimidation, addiction, and a climate of terror. The physical evidence, the unearthed steel containers, restraining equipment, even the chemical traces in the mansion's air ducts, was matched against the digital, GPS records of Max's late-night movements, mysterious wire transfers connecting shell companies to washed-out criminals, and a cache of text messages that combined veiled threats with instructions to cover up incidents or take care of troublesome people. Expert witnesses unraveled the sophisticated schemes that propped up Reed's double life. Forensic accountants testified to the breadth of money laundering, psychologists explained the coercive dynamics that rendered so many victims paralyzed by loyalty or fear. A parade of law enforcement officials, some newly reassigned to anti-corruption units, admitted to oversight, pressure from above, and a toxic hierarchy that enabled secrecy to fester unchecked. Each revelation seemed to slice another thread from the fragile tapestry of trust and privilege that Northwoods once enjoyed. Maxwell himself appeared in court each day in an ill-fitting suit, his former polish gone, tentative and thinner under the pitiless glare of national attention. Gone was the charismatic socialite, replaced by a brittle, ghost-like figure whose attempts at defiance evaporated before the momentum of so many voices finally united in condemnation. At times, Max tried to challenge the narrative, offering cryptic denials or blaming subordinates for any wrongdoing, but each day the prosecution countered with undeniable facts, witness after witness, sometimes showing video evidence or reading out chilling journal entries from missing women, leaving the jury visibly shaken. The defense attempted to sow doubt, pronouncing evidence as circumstantial, suggesting vendettas, and trying to discredit former insiders as opportunists or unreliable. Yet their efforts faltered against the mountain of corroboration. Even when they summoned psychiatric experts to discuss Max's upbringing and psychological state, hoping to humanize him or argue for diminished capacity, the prosecution meticulously refuted claims, recentering the suffering of victims over any sympathy for the accused. The nation watched, riveted, as the trial laid bare the extent of institutional protection around Reed. The courtroom drama was broadcast in careful recaps across every major outlet, with live feeds dissected by legal analysts and survivors' advocates alike. Panelists debated police complicity, the normalization of violence behind closed doors, and the unseen machinery that allowed the rich and connected to live above the law for so long. The testimony of whistleblowers and finely empowered staffers was received as something like a national exorcism, purging years of collective silence at last. Jurors, their identities fiercely protected, were said to be deeply affected. After weeks of arguments, endless hours of witness pain and prosecutorial precision, they delivered their verdict. guilty on all counts. The announcement was met with a kind of exhausted relief, a victory not just over one man, but over a malignant culture that prized secrecy above justice. The sentence was unambiguous: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus additional decades for related charges of murder, drug trafficking, and obstruction. In the hearing's final moments, Maxwell stood, hands trembling, and for a brief instant seemed to register the true finality of the world closing in on him. There were no last-minute speeches, only a stammered apology that failed to rise to the moment, overpowered by the voiced pain of those his crimes had scarred. Reporters later described the courthouse atmosphere as part funeral, part rebellion. There was mourning for what had been lost, for the trust so thoroughly abused, and for all the victims buried by silence. But there was a sense of reclamation too, the hard-won justice echoing outward, forcing small reckonings in other privileged enclaves across the country. Donations surged to women's shelters, new legislation was tabled to strengthen oversight of private security and close loopholes exploited by the wealthy. Politicians who once hobnobbed in Northwood scrambled to distance themselves, issuing statements of support for transparency and reform. In the aftermath, the ruins of Reed's empire became both an object of morbid curiosity and a rallying cry for accountability. His estate, once bustling with parties and socialites, was cordoned off, the subject of ongoing forensic searches and property seizures. Documentary filmmakers vied for interviews, non-fiction authors began drafts, true crime podcasts dissected the trial's every moment. For the surviving victims, it was only an imperfect closure. Many struggled with ongoing trauma, the long shadows of their ordeal never fully lifting even with the bar of justice finally brought down. The collapse of Maxwell Reed was total, financially, socially, and personally. His assets were liquidated with much of the proceeds earmarked for victim restitution. The luxurious facade of Northwoods was forever tarnished. Property values plummeted while city inspectors and outside auditors descended, hoping to prevent future catastrophes. Former staff braved interviews, encouraging whistleblowing protections for those still trapped in exploitative environments, and sparking a slow but visible cultural change. In the haze following the verdict, one thing was clear: the case had changed not only the victims' lives, but the entire community's direction. Lawsuits from families of missing persons accumulated. Some former allies of Maxwell turned state's evidence to avoid prosecution themselves. New programs for witness protection, anonymous tip lines, and embedded social workers in upscale neighborhoods expanded. The city, bruised and forced to confront its own failings, finally prioritized real reforms over hollow appearances. Maxwell's trial entered the lexicon as shorthand for the catastrophic failure of unchecked power. Universities cited the proceedings in courses on law, ethics, and sociology. Lawyers referenced the Northwoods effect, the way reputation and money, once formidable shields, could be shattered by resolve and collective action. In popular memory, the trial would never simply mark the end of a criminal but the start of vigilance, a promised refusal to ever let silence hold so much sway again. Concluding remarks: Northwoods Mansion, a silent witness. Once, the Northwoods Mansion was a monument to aspiration, a palace nestled behind labyrinthine hedges, cloaked in the reassuring symbols of inherited privilege. Its gates were the threshold between myth and reality, a stage where New York's most powerful gathered to toast to invisible fortunes. But as the years unraveled, and especially in the wake of Maxwell Reed's spectacular downfall, the mansion took on a new role, that of the city's most haunted secret, a place where history echoed more in the absences than the presences. Today, Northwood stands abandoned. Its windows, which once sparkled with laughter and elegance, are ghostly hollow, panes dust-veiled, reflecting only the memory of former glory. The marble floors, hollowed by thousands of footsteps, some frantic, some celebratory, some regretful, now play host to little but the skitter of mice or the hush of wind-pressed leaves. Wild ivy claws at the limestone, nature reclaiming borders once so fiercely protected by technology and private guards. The rusted gates are locked not to keep people out, but as if to restrain the anguish within. Locals avoid the grounds by night. There's talk in the neighboring streets and dim-lit local bars, of strange flickers from attic windows and mournful sounds that ride the fog. Taxi drivers take the long route around Northwoods after midnight. Teenagers dare each other to touch the front door, but none have the courage to linger. In place of prestige, the house now invites only shivers, its reputation transformed from sanctuary to shunned relic, a warning no amount of money could erase. Yet for those who dare to look past its ruined beauty, Northwood serves as a vessel of stories too grand for any single headline. It holds the secrets of deals brokered in mahogany libraries, of fleeting romances and quiet despair, of crimes devised in velvet-draped darkness and silenced by thick envelopes and thicker walls. Detectives who combed through its hidden rooms and subterranean vaults described a feeling, part dread, part awe, as if the stones themselves wanted desperately to confess. The physical remnants of tragedy remain everywhere. Police tape hangs tattered on garden gates, and old evidence markers left behind in the rush for news coverage are sometimes found tangled in the grass. In the basement, faint stains endure on unforgiving concrete, silent testimony to what transpired there. Upstairs, closets are still furred with expensive clothing left behind as if their owners vanished in haste or heartbreak. The air inside is thick with dust and echoes, a sob caught in the rafters, a stifled shout from behind a bolted door. Despite city proposals to raise the property, no one quite has the stomach to see it gone. Each attempt at redevelopment falters. Wealthy buyers recoil, philanthropists balk, preservationists debate whether to restore or demolish a place so steeped in notoriety. Developers find permits slow-walked or mysteriously lost. There's something about Northwoods that resists easy erasure, a sense that it must stand not as a shrine to luxury, but as a cautionary monument to the darkness that can thrive behind society's most glittering facade. For the families of victims, the mansion is a graveyard with no headstones. They leave flowers, notes, and framed photographs on its locked gates, tiny acts of remembrance that punctuate the indifference of stone. Advocacy groups hold vigils on the anniversary of the police raid, flames flickering in milk glass jars now clouded with rain. Some former staff, their faces still creased by trauma, sometimes stand at the edge of the grounds, lost in a private reckoning with the secrets they bore. Journalists, too, find themselves inexplicably drawn back year after year, filing updates and retrospectives whenever a new detail emerges. Documentarians train their cameras on the peeling stucco and fog-choked parkland, wrestling with how to render such horror without becoming voyeurs. The house, they all admit, has become a kind of character, maddeningly silent and uncooperative, yet inexorably central to America's modern Gothic lore. For the community at large, Northwood's mansion is a puncture in the city's grand narrative, a reminder that some wounds do not close neatly, and that no amount of distance or denial can bleach out the events that unfolded within its halls. The trauma lingers in little ways, a slight tightening in the chest as one passes, the way sunlight never seems to fully warm the shadow falling across its facade. Neither time nor wealth has softened the legacy of Northwoods. It stands not for the ascension of the American dream, but for its most profound failure, a monument carved not just by excess, but by suffering, conspiracy, and silence. Urban legends now swirl around it, that every mirror inside reflects more than your own image, that at midnight the house replays its worst moments in a hush of wind and shadow. Yet the real horror is not supernatural, but painstakingly real. The sum total of lives upended, families broken, and justice long delayed. Perhaps in the end, Northwoods will fall to the hunger of roots and rain. Or perhaps it will remain, a scar upon the cityscape, outlasting those who built it and those who suffered there. Either way, it serves as cold testimony, that behind every gleaming gate can lurk stories desperate to be told, and that silence, whether bought or imposed, is never truly empty.